Hello my friends and welcome back to PhilosoGaming, What Makes a Narrative Gaming Masterpiece, Part 2, The Tomb Raider. Last time we discussed the concept of ludonarrative dissonance, and hypothesized that minimizing it was the key to creating a masterpiece in a narrative game. To test this hypothesis, we are going to look at a number of games that both have wide acclaim as a masterpiece and strong examples of ludonarrative dissonance. Today we are going to take a look at the Tomb Raider reboot. The history behind this game is itself interesting because it basically tells the evolution of the action-adventure platformer genre. The 1996 Tomb Raider made waves not only for gameplay, but for having a sexy female protagonist. It set a bar for action-adventure games, and factored significantly in inspiring the Uncharted series in 2007. And in turn, the innovations and popularity of Uncharted inspired the 2013 reboot of the Tomb Raider. Now, Uncharted was an extraordinary series after overcoming the mechanical difficulties of the first game, but it had a lot of ludonarrative dissonance. Unexplained superhuman parkour, the ability to take tons of gunshots and just shrug them off, Wolverine-style healing factor, all of these things made no sense, but us players were willing to forgive and forget, because if it went for hyper-realism, it wouldn't have been much fun, and we have seen similar mechanics in games that had better explanation for those mechanics, and as a result, we were already ready to accept them. The Tomb Raider offered a number of solutions to those problems. In the 2013 Tomb Raider, death and injury was made easier and more visceral. Tons of unique death animations for different parts of the game, enemies die fairly quickly, and so does Laura in gunfights, and Laura's cries of pain when hurt contributed to this. Laura wasn't a superhuman. She felt that pain, and thus so did the player, and thus the game closed that ludonarrative gap. Laura also didn't start out with all the skills and attitude of an action hero. The RPG elements of improving tools over time, combined with Laura's narrative struggle to learn how to traverse the environment, and our own learning of the mechanics of traversal, closed the ludonarrative gap of our character being a flawless action hero who happens to break things, to a person who breaks things while becoming an action hero. For all of its fixes and improvements, the Tomb Raider has one sequence that lives in infamy. Early on in the game, Lara kills a deer, and has an emotional breakdown over the horrible thing she did by taking a life. However, Lara is literally killing dozens of humans who happen to be attacking her, both in self-defense but also initiating stealth kills with no emotional response. Now, this isn't true for everyone, but I feel that it is safe to say that most people value human life over animal life, and consider killing an animal not morally problematic. Lara herself wasn't presented as having any particular attachment to animals. Thus, us players hit a huge wall of ludonarrative dissonance at a moment that was supposed to have a big emotional impact. Why would I cry over a deer if I'm an average person who eats meat and resigned myself to becoming a mass murderer in this really horrible situation? It's been 3 years and I continue to hear people talk about this moment more than any other. And yet, in spite of this, the Tomb Raider 2013 is still a masterpiece. This is a huge moment of ludonarrative dissonance, and there's no real justifying or getting around it. And yet, most people I have talked to do in fact find a way to justify it, separate from the evidence in the story. The main justification I hear goes somewhat along the lines that Laura was in a state of shock up until that moment, and killing the deer was a moment of clarity that allowed Laura to understand the situation she is in, and symbolizes a loss of innocence. Regardless of whether you believe the explanation, the point that remains is that the fans want to justify and fix that ludonarrative dissonance. They want to close the gap themselves by whatever means to preserve the integrity of the masterpiece. This tells us that the disconnect of this moment, when combined with the successes of the rest of this game, just didn't matter. Add on top of that, that all of the standard action-adventure disconnects were being closed, There was honestly not much beyond this moment to create that gap between player and story. So the Tomb Raider seems to give some evidence that our original hypothesis is correct. It fixed the ludonarrative dissonance expected of the genre, and only had one real moment of dissonance that ultimately didn't detract from the experience of the game. With as little ludonarrative dissonance as possible, the other remarkable aspects of the game shone through. The Tomb Raider's dissonance, however, can be reduced to just that one moment. But what about a game where the disconnect is constantly present? Join me next week when we take a look at The Last of Us for how it overcame its ludonarrative dissonance. Thank you for watching, and stay true.